Hey YouTube, it's your history teacher, Mr. Terry, back with another History Teacher Reacts video. I'm excited about this one because the patrons voted on this week over at Patreon, and that is what life was like as a samurai in feudal Japan, and the channel is Weird History. So this is awesome. If you know, and been following lately, I have been playing Ghost of Tsushima, the new samurai-based action game on the PlayStation 4, and I've been loving it. And not just because of the history, but the gameplay and stuff. But I thought this was a good topic for the time because I know a lot of other people have been playing that game and talking about samurai a lot lately. But it'd be good to know a little bit more about what it was actually like to be a samurai. And hopefully this will do that for us. All right, before we begin, though, the original video link is down below. I always want you to check out the original video. Make sure you like, sub, view the original stuff because these awesome content creators are doing such a good job. And another invitation to join our Discord server. We've got a lot of good history-minded and history fans out there over there. There's a link down below to that as well that you can find. Also, if you'd like to vote in weekly polls, the Patreon link is down below, and any tier will get you voting access, but other ones will get you cool merch, cool history-related merch like the Aztec shirt and other cool stuff. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. What life was like as a samurai?
Warrior of feudal Japan has been a pop culture staple for decades. Brave, disciplined, skillful, and above all, honorable samurai have appeared as the heroes of beloved films, novels, television shows, and even comic books. But as is often the case, the reality is way more complex and way more interesting than the fiction. Today, we're going to take a look.
I like that. Way more interesting than the fiction. Sometimes you learn about something in history and you're like, wait, that wasn't as cool as, yeah, the stories I've heard from film, movies, games, literature, all that stuff. But that would be cool because, I mean, it's already, samurai are already pretty awesome. So
look at what life was really like as a samurai in feudal Japan. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, we'd be much obliged if you would leave a comment and let us know what topics you would like to hear about.
Awesome, please do.
Okay, let's head back to feudal Japan. The word samurai is derived from the Japanese word subaru, which means to serve. Both the word and the warrior class that it describes came into being around the 8th century, or what's known as Japan's Heian period.
Something I want to let you know that I want to look for is one of the things that we try to do as teachers is do a lot of compare and contrast. And usually when we talk about feudal Japan, like in my classes, we've just recently been talking about feudal Europe. And of course, the big comparison a lot of people make are European knights to Japanese samurai, because it's kind of interesting. They develop a somewhat unique social structure, feudalism. Okay, look into that more if you don't know what feudalism is, but it's the social structure, economic structure kind of there. But interestingly that those two systems developed independently away from each other, right? And what it kind of shows is that feudalism and the need for like samurai or knights, full-time soldiers, servants of the people, is usually a reflection of what society is like, because you obviously need something like that. So one of the things I really want to learn is a little bit more of the compare and contrast. I know, a bunch of things, but I'd love to learn some new things, and we'll see. Hopefully, we can get some.
For comparison,
that's just on my mind.
Roughly the same time knights were going on crusades over in Europe. The role evolved over the years, and by the 12th century, the samurai would begin to resemble the cultured, disciplined warrior that is familiar to us today. Prior to the Heian period, Japan's imperial court built their military by drafting inexperienced and generally unreliable peasants. At the same time, the country's nobility were employing highly trained private soldiers. By the end of the 8th century, the government began to integrate these elite warriors in the nation's military establishment. I
mean, it makes sense, right? You talk about this where obviously a full-time soldier, I don't care where you are when you live, a full-time soldier is going to be better than a drafted soldier, right? Someone that is there because, for a couple reasons. One, they volunteered for that life or for that career, or maybe are kind of born into a class that does that. Kind of like knights and samurai kind of come from noble classes, but those are generally going to be better. So you can imagine how as societies interact with each other and compete with each other, the societies that have full-time standing armies, trained armies, rather than relying on just recruiting, a peasant or farmer, are obviously going to to win at. And you can go back, look at like ancient Sparta, for example, would be an example of that. But you can see it going through now the Middle Ages throughout the world.
These men were the first samurai. The birth of the samurai order changed everything. The military was quickly replaced with what were, for all intents and purposes, professional mercenaries. This made enlistment popular with elites and lower
Money's behind
aristocrats seeking employment and valuable training. These changes also meant that noble families had increasing influence over military policy, which, as you might imagine, they were pretty happy about.
Something to think about, too, about why often these full-time soldiers come from noble classes is because usually noble classes, especially in the era of the Middle Ages, derive their power authority from land ownership. Right, in a place like Japan, where 4/5 of the archipelago is mountains, land is obviously very hard to come by and to be able to own and protect and to have that land, because you're always going to have a target on your back for people, for resources in a place like Japan. Same thing can go over in Europe too, really anywhere. But specifically with Japan, you're going to need to be able to defend that land. And the reason so you have a necessity. Now, where does the ability come from? The ability comes from, because you are wealthy and have land ownership, you can get people you can pay to work, right? Because they need land, they need food and stuff like that. So what that allows you and your family and maybe your extended family is not to have everybody have to be like an agriculturalist. Like, you can afford to have people in your family not just be like farming all the time. They can actually be full-time trained soldiers. If you're a poor family, right, and this is why I usually don't see samurai or knights from a poor family, you need every single person in your family to be able to do work, right? You can't afford to not be doing that thing. Plus, you don't own the land anyways. So you can see a little bit about that connection between social status and these type of full-time warrior soldiers.
In the mid-12th century, the Minamoto clan defeated the Taira clan in the Genpei War of 1180. The fallout of this victory was enormous.
This is what I've heard is really the beginning of the real samurai that we know.
Under the command of Minamoto Yoritomo, the first shogun. The shogun dispersed networks of loyal samurai throughout the country. They served as royal vassals who maintained order in the provinces and ran local governments on the shogun's behalf.
I'm sure you know this, and maybe they get into it. I want to make sure people understand how a shogun relates to other things. It's one of the differences between feudalism in Europe and feudalism in Japan. Is technically, like in Europe, for example, you have a monarch, right? That's usually at the top of things. And in Japan, you would see that maybe as the emperor. But there's a difference in that, where a monarch in Europe has more power often than the emperor of Japan. The emperor of Japan, especially by about this time, when these samurai come into power and stuff, are more like spiritual, almost semi-religious heads, and where the real power lied was who controlled the samurai, or who controlled really the military. And in Japan, that's the shogun. So you have this like on paper kind of idea that the emperor in Japan is the head of society, I guess you would say, and the culture of Japan. But in reality, when it comes to day-to-day, it's really the shogun that's really pushing the buttons for things. And that is one of the differences between the social structures. And of course, the daimyo, who relate to like lords in Europe, are loyal to that shogun, and then you have samurai who are loyal to those daimyo, very much like knights being loyal to a lord. But that's one difference, by the way.
This tightening of military control would continue into the 13th century when the invasions of Mongol Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, forced the whole country to band together under the shogun.
Hey, we know that. You guys, if you've been playing Ghost of Tsushima, I definitely recommend the game. That's what this game is set in, is the Mongol invasion of the island of Tsushima, which is an island just between Korea and Japan, where the Mongols were coming over from. But one thing we know about history is Japan is one of those places that have been maybe similar like Greece or something like that. Because of its physical geography, it's hard to unify, and people usually identify with their clan or something like that rather than like a large nationality. But events like this, like the Persian Wars in Greece or the Mongol invasion of Japan, force unification, and you start to see similarities amongst your clans and whatever divisions you had before. And you need that to be able to defeat an enemy like Mongols or Persia.
If you were going to be a samurai, you needed to start young.
Love samurai armor, huh?
Well, one famous spiritual guide from the medieval era recommended encouraging bravery from the time of infancy. Children who were part of the samurai class could start learning the basics of fencing with wooden swords as early as 3 years old. Yeah,
Dude.
you heard that right. 3. And
I want to fight. I don't want to fight that little samurai. You imagine what were you doing at 3? Were you professionally training to fight? Maybe you were playing with swords in the back, but probably wasn't like this kind of training.
while modern society requires you to be 18 to see an R-rated movie, medieval samurai kids would be fighting with real, lethal blades by the time they were 5. In any case,
By their
training
5?
was underway before the age of 10, and boys would often be sent to special schools where they studied the samurai philosophies of spirituality, literature, weaponry, and conflict.
Yeah, this is very similar to knights, in Europe too. They start at a young age, and start that. So, again, very different than what we do today. This very mature kind of training starting very early. But you can see with both, you have these honor codes. Because it's one thing to be able to have skills, but it's one thing to know how to use, or the situations to use them. So if you don't have an honor code, or something they're devoting themselves to, all you're really doing is you could just be training. I mean, you could train just killers. You know what I mean? And people that are just going to use their skills for not really the betterment of society, but far more for themselves, which, it kind of makes sense where if samurai are going to kind of derive from this idea that they need, or they're used as mercenaries, meaning basically paid to protect or paid to do something specifically, you better have something to keep them in check, right? And some kind of moral code instilled in them from a young age. I'm talking too much.
Samurai were bound to maintain loyalty to the shogun and to the daimyo, who were the feudal warlords that ruled the various regions of Japan. These daimyo were supposed to rule their territories with wisdom and benevolence, but as you probably guessed, things didn't always go that way. In reality, many daimyo were corrupt, power-hungry, and determined to expand their regions through any means necessary.
Common
This
story
often
in
made life as a
humanity,
samurai
right?
a bit challenging. Being
Dude,
honor-bound
he's
to carry
walking
out
in
the
the air.
orders of a malevolent lord could take its toll on a samurai's
Did they do
good
that?
name. Over time, the samurai class as a whole earned a reputation for lawless, vicious behavior.
Yeah, there's like in the Ghost of Tsushima, those masks they were there. Those are so cool, so intimidating looking, I think. Many samurai struggled economically.
Samurai
They don't really make
powerful and
money
respected,
outside of-
but technically, they were not nobility. Under medieval Japan's rigid caste system, the samurai were part of a special military class that was treated more like merchants. This meant they faced many of the same financial challenges as merchants, and steady employment could be hard to come by. Complicating life for a samurai was that different shoguns would enact different rules governing their status. For example,
In like European feudalism, you often don't have a money system anyways. Your pay, if you will, compensation, I guess if you want to call it that, is being able to have a life, a place to live, food to eat, and protection upmost. That's the biggest thing, is protection. So you don't really need that. Everything you need, you are self-sufficient completely there. So you may not be rich in wealth, but you can be, if you want to say it, rich in status in a way, because that means something, especially in this area.
For example, one shogun defined samurai as an elite body, which sounds pretty cool until you realize it was just a way to extend the limits of his power over them. This kind of proclamation could make it more difficult to earn a living without putting a single extra cent into a samurai's pocket.
Sure. I mean, samurai are rich. They would do whatever they want. They could do whatever
While
they want
Zen
if they were
Buddhism
actually
didn't
wealthy.
arrive until the 12th century, Japan
Materially.
had known of Buddhism in general since the 6th century. With heavy restrictions on the cultivation of birds and animals for food, the religion led the country to embrace a diet heavy in fruits, vegetables, and grains, especially rice. As noted previously, samurai often struggled economically. This, in addition to their strict moral code, made them frugal eaters. While the aristocracy and the military elite dined at banquets that served the finest food and drinks, the samurai, like the peasants, relied on husked rice as a staple. This rice was supposed to be provided as rations by their respective lords. If expecting to go into battle, a samurai might supplement their diet with abalone, chestnuts, and kelp. When it came to beverages, samurai were allowed to partake in Japan's most widely consumed alcoholic beverage, the rice wine known as sake. Hey, if you had to lay down your life for your boss without hesitation, you might want a stiff drink too.
Yeah. So back to what he was saying about food, I do know that samurai, at least they tied the whole like not having a ton of food also to kind of their code, where they're like training themselves. Maybe this is just a cop out, so you don't have to give them a lot of food, but training themselves to not have hunger pains and to like dwell on their hunger when they should be dwelling on their tasks, right? And like see it as a test for them, that one who feels hunger is weak, and you train your body and mind to be able to deal with that. So I know they kind of tied that into the kind of the Bushido code. Samurai spent their days learning.
Samurai were expected to be up at 4 a.m. for the rigid and exhausting training
Brutal.
regimens, and then, if they weren't in battle or otherwise seeing action, they were required to spend their time studying. Being a skilled warrior in feudal Japan required expert-level knowledge of martial arts and weaponry. Samurai always fought with blades of various types, but their arsenals still evolved over time. Early samurai preferred fighting with spears. Medieval samurai, who mostly traveled on horseback, were partial to bows and arrows.
Yeah, I've heard that too. That you get that the idea of the katana and fighting the swords, but for much of the Japanese history, the preferred fighting method for samurai was horseback archery, which was interesting because that was also what the Mongols did when they came in. Does that nothing to take away from their sword skill? Is still incredible, but that was kind of the big thing.
The famous samurai sword, called a katana, became popular during the Kamakura period. Along with the bow, it would remain the samurai's predominant tool well into the 15th century. But studying wasn't just about becoming deadlier. It was believed that the stability and patience required for successfully learning the martial arts would improve one's sense of composure. Whether or not it really worked is anyone's guess, since records show that samurai were often, shall we say, less than composed when dealing with the peasantry.
Jerks. Samurai armor was
Going all the way
finely
back to
crafted.
the Heian period, samurai armor was extremely flexible. Iron plated with leather or strips of bronze were finely crafted by artisans using advanced tools. As technology continued to develop and new resources became available, samurai armor evolved with it. Over time, the armor became increasingly more elaborate, which had the side effect of increasing its weight. One type of armor, called the yori or oyori, consisted of a multi-part skirt, a cuirass, shoulder pads, and a helmet. Altogether, it weighed over 60 pounds. Those samurai helmets, called kabuto, were made from iron and steel. They covered the head and had flaps that provided for protection of the neck. The helmets were carefully sculpted and highly decorated. A daimyo warlord, for example, might wear some sort of animal iconography.
I have that mustache
Apparently,
mask in the
branding has
game.
always been important.
Yeah. So that's cool. I think people underrate or underappreciate the weight of armor. I'm not just talking samurai armor. I mean, you've seen pictures of knights and samurai and stuff. Those stuff is heavy. And imagine, again, you got to march for days in war to go to war, and you have to be able to carry that and keep your strength. Weapons too. Like, a lot of people don't understand how heavy a sword actually is, especially if you want a good one that's not going to break. These guys had to be, of course, have incredible endurance, but the strength to be able to carry that stuff, again, long distances, and be able to maneuver quick enough where you can be quick in combat. Because you don't want to be too slow, but you don't want to be too heavy because you might, but you don't want to be undefended.
If a samurai sought to wed, they needed the approval of someone who was the same or higher social rank than the person they wanted to marry. For samurai of higher ranks, marriages had to be arranged, and those of lower ranks often had arranged marriages as a formality. Marriages were usually arranged within the samurai class, although the lowest ranking members were allowed to marry commoners.
Yeah, the whole marrying a class has, of course, been a big thing in a lot of cultures for a long time. And it's also the people you meet the most, because you generally work and live near people of your class, so it's not uncommon. So yeah, nothing necessarily new here. Dude, I like all their haircuts. They're like the top knot and the side knots, and it's shaved around there.
While women
I
had
should do
vast
that.
freedoms and rights during the early days of the samurai, the society grew more patriarchal over time. By the 13th
Male-dominated.
century, the husbands had control over their households and their wives.
Sure.
Divorce was permitted, and having a second or even third marriage was not unusual.
Very common.
Tales of medieval
Mythological. Cool.
samurai were passed down orally and eventually transcribed into epics.
Oh,
Such
yeah.
narratives were often characterized by long, detailed descriptions of military engagements and the samurai who fought in them. Warriors with concerns about combat or their own military service often looked to such tales for wisdom and guidance. The samurai also appeared in Japanese mythology. For example, one myth often retold by kabuki and no theaters tells of a famous general called Yoshitsune. His brother, the shogun, became violently jealous of his reputation, forcing the general to flee.
Cool.
In the 12th century, Zen Buddhism arrived in Japan. The religion, which requires adherents maintain a strict regimen of meditation,
A lot more spiritual form of Buddhism.
made a perfect complement to the lives of restraint and control enjoyed by the samurai. Zen Buddhist meditation also required great physical endurance. This appealed to the samurai because they loved to test the limits of their own strength. But perhaps most important was what Zen Buddhism offered the samurai philosophically. The samurai lived lives of immense danger. As the famous author from Japan's Tokugawa period observed, a samurai's chief business is to keep constantly in mind, by day and by night, the fact that he has to perish. Zen Buddhism and its indifference
Come to
the
terms
circle
with
of
death.
life gave samurai the metaphysical framework to face their mortality and be effective as warriors.
Samurai are expected to act with honor at all times, for sure. This is the big thing that you talk about with their code, is their honor and how committed they were to it, and the punishments for breaking such honor codes.
Over time, the samurai began to develop the famous moral code that would someday become known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. A samurai's loyalty was to his daimyo and to the shogun, but the code governed his actions. Bushido required its adherents to be brave and honorable in battle, but also in everyday life. This code was standardized under the Kamakura shogunate in 1232 in a document called the Formulary of Adjudications. While they were often ignored in many regions of Japan, there were still consequences for samurai who acted without honor. The most severe of these consequences was seppuku, a formalized way of committing suicide that was seen as a way to reclaim one's lost honor.
And the only way you could gain honor, they say.
Seppuku could be imposed as a punishment for dishonorable behavior, and in wartime was often considered an honorable way to escape the shame of capture.
Yeah.
Over the course of the Kamakura,
One of the things that I didn't know going into Ghost of Tsushima, the game, was, and I want to know if that's how much of it's true, and you can help me out in the comments if you want to know. But there, in the game, it's basically forbidden and totally dishonorable to fight in in stealth, assassinations, that kind of thing, poisoning the others. The only honorable way to fight for a samurai was basically face to face. And basically, from what I can gather, is they have to have the ability to defend themselves. I guess you could just take it as that way. And it's shameful, in the game, when you do stealth assassinations and those types of tactics. But I was wondering if that is what the truth is in that. Because I hadn't known that going into the game. That's something I picked up in the game, but I wonder if that's true. So if you know, let me know.
Period of Japan's history, samurai philosophy grew to encompass matters beyond those directly related to battle and honor. Reflecting this expansion, warrior training came to include practice in literature and the arts. This aspect of samurai life was so important, one famous epic eulogized a particular warrior's death by describing him as preeminent in the arts of both sword and poetry. The artistic side of samurai life was captured in the phrase bunbu ryodo, which translates to literary arts, military arts, both ways. Or more informally, the pen and the sword in accord. The samurai were warrior poets whose lives could vary greatly depending on what era they lived in.
That's one thing you did a lot in the game too. In the game is you write haikus in the game. You actually get to choose the stanzas. It's Japanese, a form of Japanese poetry. It's really cool. So yeah, that's neat. That was part of their life.
Within any given period, their existence was shaped by circumstances like armed conflicts, economics, moral philosophy, class, and geographic location. Do you think you would have made it as a samurai in feudal Japan?
What do you
Let
think?
us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.
Yeah, I guess I would try to make it if the alternative life was something a lot more difficult. But those strict codes and stuff like that, I think a lot of people could say they could follow those, but in reality, could you? So I wouldn't confidently say one way or the other. But I don't know. What do you think, that type of life? Also, would you rather be I asked this to my chat in our discussions on Discord and in the games. Would you rather be a samurai or a European knight? If we're going to compare those two with honor codes of professional soldiers. So anyway, all right, well, that was great. A lot of good little tidbits of things. Did pick up on some things I didn't know there, which was good. A few things I did know. Nothing weird in there. I know they're called weird history. I don't know if that's like they're trying to bring in weird things, but pretty traditional and professional kind of right there. But that was cool. So able to see a lot of things like I was saying before. I was hoping to compare and contrast with European Nights and also get some context for Ghost of Tsushima, which I've been playing, and able to do that kind of for sure there. So it's actually one of my favorite things as a teacher. Is I love talking about this. It's one of the things that I find a lot of the the students coming in are really into Japanese culture, like in general. A lot of them talk about samurai and they get real excited about it. And I always have a really enjoyable time being able to share them, and especially do the compare and contrast, because usually youth really are into Knights too. So it's one of the more enjoyable things for me to teach, and hopefully I can add a little bit more detail as having learned from these guys, and be able to translate into, of course, to my classroom. So, all right. Well, anyways, I loved it. Tell me what you thought below, and love to see that. Again, the original video link is down below. Make sure you click that and support them over there. Like, view, subscribe their channel. That's really important to me too. Thanks again to our patron pledgers who made this video possible by voting on it, so it would get featured. Again, you can join if you'd like to. Link down below, as well as some other links to some other things too. If you want to see me play some more games, check out my gaming channel. There's a link down below. I do most of my game streaming over on the gaming channel, and we have a good time doing that. So just look up Mr. Terry Gaming, and you'll see that. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and end here. We'll see you next time. Bye.